"You're coming with me," the loner rancher said, stepping in when a widow was brutalized in a western town. The town looked tired, worn down by years of neglect and the endless wind that carried stories of travelers who never returned. Traders, prospectors, and settlers passed through, but few stayed. The air always smelled faintly of burnt fuel and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, warning the few townsfolk of an approaching shuttle, or maybe it was just the wind echoing through the empty streets. Caleb Mar rode into town on his horse, a rugged beast of no name that had carried him across more land than most people could imagine. He was a loner by choice. A rancher on the outskirts of human settlements, he raised bioengineered livestock, creatures stronger, faster, and smarter than earth-born cattle. But people didn't often come to him. Most feared the frontier, and most feared what Caleb could do when pushed. He adjusted his wide-brimmed hat against the harsh wind, keeping his eyes on the dusty street ahead. Merchants were closing up for the day, their stalls emptying quickly. A few kids played near the edge of the marketplace, their laughter light against the harsh sounds of the town. Caleb dismounted in front of the general store, tying his horse to a post. He entered, letting the small bell above the door ring. Inside, the shelves were stocked with rations, tools, and odd gadgets from faraway worlds. "Afternoon," he said simply to the shopkeeper, a thin man with a nervous smile. "Afternoon," the man replied, his eyes flicking to the doorway as if expecting trouble. In Dustfall, trouble often arrived without warning. Caleb moved slowly down the aisles, picking up supplies, dried protein packs, tools for the ranch, a few medical kits. The shopkeeper watched him, noting the careful way Caleb examined every item. Not because he mistrusted the goods, but because Caleb had learned long ago that survival depended on noticing the small details that most overlooked. Then a noise drew Caleb's attention, a raised voice, harsh, angry, coming from outside. He stepped to the doorway and looked out, squinting against the wind and dust. A woman stood near the edge of the marketplace. Her clothes were simple, worn from years of labor. Her hair was tied back, strands falling loose around her face. She was speaking to a group of men, off-world enforcers, easily recognized by their tall, lean frames and metallic uniforms. The men laughed and jeered, their words sharp and cruel, though Caleb could not hear exactly what they said. He could see the fear in the woman's eyes. The townsfolk watched from their windows and doorways, silent. They had seen this kind of thing before, and no one intervened. They were afraid. The enforcers had power, weapons, and authority that could crush them in seconds, but Caleb did not look away. The woman, whose name he learned later was Elena Voss, tried to hold her ground. She raised her chin, though her body shook. The enforcers pressed closer, and she took a step back. A crate tipped over, spilling goods onto the street. One of the men laughed and pushed it further toward her. "Leave her be," Caleb muttered under his breath. His hand rested on the hilt of a small multi-tool at his belt, not a weapon in the traditional sense, but something he could use if necessary. A man from the crowd stepped forward, perhaps hoping to help. The enforcers ignored him and shoved him aside. The crowd did not react. Fear had taught them to stay silent. Caleb could feel his jaw tighten. He remembered the old rules of the frontier, the unspoken law that humans once had before rules became written by those in power. A law of self-respect, courage, and standing up when it mattered. And right now, it mattered. He pushed open the door of the store again and called out, his voice calm but firm. "Enough!" The enforcers turned to him, surprised. They had expected silence, not resistance. One of them, taller than the rest, with a cold gleam in his eyes, stepped toward Caleb. "You're not from here," he said, voice flat. "Mind your business, human." Caleb didn't flinch. "It's my business when someone's being treated unfairly," he said. The tall enforcer laughed, a sound that echoed through the empty streets. "And what can you do about it?" "We answer to the guild. You answer to no one." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "I answer to the right thing," he said simply. Alina watched him, confusion and relief mixing on her face. She had expected no one to intervene. The enforcers were used to compliance, to fear. Caleb's calm defiance surprised them. For a moment, no one moved. Then the tallest enforcer stepped closer, hand twitching near a device at his belt. Caleb's hand rested lightly on his own tool. He didn't need a weapon. He needed the truth and the courage to back it up. The wind blew harder, carrying dust into everyone's eyes. Caleb's horse stamped outside, sensing the tension. The street felt alive, though no one wanted to admit it. Finally, Caleb spoke again, his voice low but carrying over the wind. "Walk away. Now." The enforcer hesitated. He did not like the tone. No one ever liked the tone of a man who had nothing to lose. One of the younger enforcers, perhaps sensing trouble, muttered, "Maybe we should leave." The tall one shook his head. "Not yet." Caleb stepped forward closer without raising his voice. His presence alone seemed to change the air. The crowd felt it too, though they did not understand why. Humans had a strange habit of standing up, even when the odds were against them. Sometimes that was enough. Then the unthinkable happened. A crate tipped over near Alina, and one of the enforcers reached to push her. Caleb moved like lightning. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it just enough to unbalance him, not to harm him. The man stumbled, nearly falling, but Caleb held him steady with one hand, eyes locked on his own. "Not her," Caleb said quietly, but with a weight that carried through the street. The enforcer froze. The others looked at him, unsure. The tall man's expression darkened, but he didn't act. He had underestimated the human, underestimated the frontier instinct that would not tolerate cruelty. Caleb turned to Alina, offering a hand. She hesitated, then took it. There was no shame in being helped by someone who would protect you. There was only the recognition that not all humans were alone, that some still remembered the old laws of decency. "Come with me," Caleb said. She nodded. The enforcer stepped back, unsure what to do next. Caleb's calm, controlled presence was a barrier stronger than any weapon. As they moved toward the outskirts of town, the townsfolk began to murmur. Small movements. Some peered out from windows. Others whispered encouragement. Fear had frozen them for years, but perhaps seeing one human act with courage was enough to remind them that the frontier had rules older than fear. Caleb led Alina through the dust and wind, past the empty stalls and silent shops. She stole glances at him, unsure if she should speak. Finally, she asked, "Who are you?" "Just someone who remembers what humans can do," he replied. "Sometimes that's enough." The sun dipped low in the dusty sky, casting long shadows across the settlement. The wind carried the sound of distant engines, traders returning, or perhaps scouts of the syndicate that ruled from afar. It didn't matter. Caleb didn't plan to fight them today. Not yet. Today, he had saved someone from immediate harm. That was the first step. They reached the edge of town. Caleb stopped, looking back at Dustfall Station. The town seemed smaller now, weaker but not broken. Fear was strong here, but courage had returned, even if only in a spark. "You'll be safe with me," Caleb said. "For now." Alina looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. She had been alone for too long. Someone had finally chosen to step in. Caleb adjusted his hat, mounted his horse, and nodded to her. "Hold on, we're leaving." As they rode away from Dustfall, the wind carried the dust behind them like a warning. Caleb knew this was only the beginning. The town would not forget. The syndicate would not forget. And humans never gave up, even when the odds were stacked against them. The frontier was harsh, but sometimes, just sometimes, the humans who endured it were even harsher. And Caleb Marr, he was just getting started. The wind had dropped a little as Caleb and Alina rode toward the outskirts of Dustfall Station. The sky, a dull orange from the setting sun, stretched endlessly above the dusty plains. Silence filled the space between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Alina's hands gripped the reins tightly, unsure what to expect from this quiet stranger who had just saved her. Caleb rode steadily, eyes scanning the horizon. Every movement, every sound was noted. Survival, he had learned, required constant attention. After a few minutes, Caleb slowed his horse and looked back at Alina. "We need to get to my ranch," he said. "It's a safe place for now." "You won't be harmed there." Alina nodded, trying to mask her uncertainty. "How far is it?" she asked. "Several hours' ride, far enough that the enforcers won't risk following." The wind kicked up again, carrying the faint smell of burning metal and dust. Caleb didn't speak again for a while. He preferred actions to words. Alina noticed the way his eyes moved constantly, observing the landscape, the tracks in the dust, the faint trails left by distant vehicles. He was always calculating, always thinking ahead. Finally, she spoke again. "Why did you help me?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes forward, his mind scanning the land. After a long moment, he said, "Because it was wrong what they did to you. And because I remember how humans used to behave when we weren't afraid of everything." Alina frowned. "Humans?" Caleb nodded. "Yes, humans. We survive against the odds. We protect those who can't protect themselves. And sometimes we just refuse to give up no matter what." She thought about that. In Dustfall, she had felt invisible for years. People had ignored her, left her to face trouble alone, afraid to act. And now, here was a stranger who not only acted but risked himself to protect her. It was difficult to trust, but part of her wanted to. They rode in silence for the next hour, the sun sinking lower, casting long shadows across the plains. Caleb's ranch was located near a small rise, hidden from view of anyone passing by. It was not large, but it was well defended, a safe haven built for survival, not comfort. When they finally reached it, Caleb dismounted and led Alina to a small building at the edge of the property. "This is where you'll stay," he said. "There's food, water, and supplies. You'll be safe here." Alina looked around. The ranch was surrounded by rugged terrain, natural barriers that made it difficult to approach unnoticed. Caleb's livestock grazed in the distance, creatures larger and stronger than ordinary animals, adapted to the harsh conditions. "It's impressive," she said quietly. Caleb shrugged. "It works, that's enough." As night fell, the wind calmed and the stars appeared like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Alina sat inside the small building, thinking about the events of the day. She could still feel the fear and humiliation she had endured in Dustfall, but it was replaced by something new, a sense of hope. For the first time in years, someone had taken a stand for her. Meanwhile, Caleb was outside, patrolling the perimeter. He moved silently, checking traps and sensors he had placed around the ranch. Though the town seemed far away, he knew the syndicate would not forget. They had powerful connections and resources, and human life meant little to them. He would need to prepare. The night passed quietly, but Caleb's mind was restless. He knew the syndicate would investigate Alina's disappearance. He also knew that humans, when pushed, could do incredible things. He had survived far worse than a few enforcers. And now he would protect someone who deserved protection. Morning arrived with a soft glow over the plains. Caleb and Alina began their day quietly. He taught her how to handle the ranch's livestock, how to notice signs of danger, and how to prepare simple defenses. Alina was a quick learner. Her previous life in Dustfall had required practical skills, and she applied them well. Over breakfast, Alina finally spoke again. "What exactly happened in Dustfall? Why do they treat people like that?" Caleb's expression darkened. "The law isn't there, not really. The town is controlled by a syndicate that answers only to itself. Humans are workers, cogs in a machine. The enforcers enforce the rules of the syndicate, not justice." Alina frowned. "So no one can stop them?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "Not usually, but humans have ways to survive even without law. We find strength where others see none. We endure, adapt, and sometimes fight back. That's what we'll do." Alina nodded slowly, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She had been alone for too long, but now she had an ally, a human who remembered what it meant to stand up for what is right. The next few days passed with training, observation, and preparation. Caleb taught Alina to notice patterns, to read the land, and to anticipate the actions of others. He explained that the syndicate relied on fear and obedience. If humans stopped being afraid, their control weakened. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Caleb spoke again. "We're not just protecting you, we're sending a message. The town will see what humans can do when we act." Alina looked at him, eyes wide. "You mean fight them?" Caleb smiled faintly. "Not fight like soldiers. Fight like humans, with intelligence, courage, and persistence. We don't need weapons to prove our strength. We need resolve." Alina felt a surge of hope. For the first time, she believed that maybe Dustfall Station could change. Maybe the fear that had held the town for years could be broken. The following morning, Caleb and Alina scouted the paths leading to the town. They noted patrol routes, supply shipments, and weak points in the town's defenses. Caleb explained that the syndicate relied on predictability. Humans, he said, were not predictable. They adapted. They improvised. That was their advantage. Alina listened closely. She realized that survival was more than running from danger. It was understanding it, anticipating it, and sometimes facing it directly. Caleb's lessons were not just about safety. They were about reclaiming dignity and strength. Late that night, as they prepared to rest, a faint signal reached Caleb's portable communicator. It was from the town, a subtle warning that the syndicate had noticed Alina's disappearance. Caleb's jaw tightened. The time for preparation was ending. Action would soon be required. He explained to Alina that their goal was not revenge, but protection. They would not harm anyone unnecessarily, but they would not allow injustice to continue. Humans, he reminded her, were capable of extraordinary things when they refused to be passive. The night stretched on, silent except for the distant calls of animals and the soft rustle of the wind. Alina lay awake, thinking about the town, the enforcers, and the quiet strength of Caleb Mar. She realized that she was no longer helpless. With his guidance, she could stand, endure, and act. By the next morning, Caleb had laid out a plan. They would not return to Dustfall immediately. First, they would ensure Alina's safety and build the means to resist the syndicate's influence. Then, when the time was right, they would show the town that humans could not be ignored, intimidated, or broken. Caleb's words echoed in Alina's mind. Humans have survived the worst of the frontier, and sometimes surviving is not enough. Sometimes we make the frontier remember who we are. Alina felt a determination rising within her. She had been pushed down for too long. She had been silenced, isolated, and afraid. Now, with Caleb's guidance, she felt the spark of courage that had lain dormant for years. As they prepared for the day, Caleb checked the perimeter one last time. The ranch was quiet, secure, and ready for what was to come. The syndicate would not know what hit them, not yet. Humans, he thought, often waited until the moment was right. Then they acted. Alina looked out at the plains, the sun rising over the horizon. Dustfall Station lay in the distance, unaware of the storm that was quietly forming, fueled by courage, intelligence, and the unyielding human spirit. Caleb turned to her. "Today, we continue learning. Tomorrow, we act. And when the time comes, the town will see that humans do not bend easily and that even one human standing can change everything." Alina nodded. For the first time in years, she felt ready. The frontier was harsh, the odds were high, but she was not alone. And that made all the difference. As the morning light painted the plains gold, Caleb and Alina began their work, unaware of the eyes watching from Dustfall, unaware of the subtle movements of the syndicate. But soon, very soon, the frontier would remember. And humans, once silent, afraid, and overlooked, would make their presence known. The first light of dawn stretched across the plains like a pale ribbon of hope. Caleb Marr adjusted his hat against the chill morning wind and surveyed his ranch from the ridge. The livestock grazed quietly, their enhanced senses alert even in the calm. Everything was peaceful, too peaceful, Caleb thought, because Dustfall Station was never truly calm. Somewhere just beyond the horizon, the syndicate stirred. Alina stepped beside him, her eyes still wide with the lessons of the past few days. She had learned quickly, adapting to Caleb's careful routines, and now she felt a sense of purpose she had not known for years. "What happens now?" she asked. Caleb studied her face for a moment. "Now," he said, "we prepare. They'll come looking and we need to be ready. Humans survive not because we're the strongest, but because we're clever, patient, and unpredictable." Alina nodded. She remembered the fear in the town, the way people had looked away when she was mistreated. That fear would not last forever, not if Caleb had anything to do with it. They spent the morning inspecting the ranch's defenses. Caleb had long anticipated trouble, even in this isolated part of human space. He showed Alina the perimeter sensors he had built, the simple but effective traps that relied more on alerting and delaying intruders than harming them. He demonstrated how to move silently across the terrain, how to read tracks, and how to notice signs of approaching trouble before it was too late. "You see," he said, crouching beside a small sensor, "most people wait until it's too late. Humans don't. We act early. That's how we survive." Alina practiced, her fingers brushing over the dust, noticing footprints, scuff marks, and faint trails in the sand. She realized that survival was about noticing small details, the things everyone else overlooked. By midday, Caleb had decided it was time to teach her another lesson, the lesson of using the mind as a weapon. "They'll think they can scare you," he said. "They'll think humans can be broken with words, threats, or numbers, but humans aren't broken so easily. We adapt. We trick. We survive." He led her to a series of false trails across the plains, shallow paths that led nowhere, signals meant to confuse anyone following. Alina smiled at the cleverness, feeling a thrill of excitement. She had never been part of something like this before, and it gave her courage. As the sun dipped low, they returned to the ranch. Caleb had noticed something unusual, faint dust trails leading toward the property. He knelt, studying the prints. "Visitors," he said quietly. Alina's heart raced. "Do you think it's them? The syndicate?" Caleb nodded. "Possibly scouts. We'll find out soon enough." He motioned for her to stay back. With careful, measured steps, he moved toward the perimeter. The scouts were cautious, clearly expecting no resistance. They approached slowly, unaware of the traps Caleb had set, unaware that the rancher they thought was isolated and weak was watching every movement. Caleb waited until they were close, then triggered a simple device that released a cloud of fine dust, temporarily blinding the intruders and marking their positions. The scouts cursed, stumbling, and Caleb used the opportunity to call out, his voice calm but commanding. "You should leave," he said. "This land isn't yours to take." The tallest scout, the one who seemed to lead the group, raised his hands. "We mean no harm," he said, though Caleb could see the doubt in his eyes. "Then leave," Caleb replied. "And tell your masters that humans aren't so easy to intimidate." The scouts hesitated, looking at one another. They had expected an easy target, not a clever, prepared rancher. Finally, they retreated, disappearing back toward Dustfall Station. Alina exhaled, relief and excitement mingling in her chest. You didn't even touch them," she said. Caleb nodded. "Humans don't always need weapons to win. Sometimes we win by being smarter, faster, and more prepared. Fear works both ways. They thought they could scare me. They were wrong." That night, Caleb and Alina sat by the fire outside the small building where she stayed. The stars spread above them like a blanket of light, endless and constant. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then spoke. "You know, humans are funny," he said. "We survive the worst of everything, storms, predators, war, but we're also stubborn. We don't just survive. We push back. We take what's ours not with violence but with patience, with cleverness, with endurance. That's our strength. Alina listened, feeling a sense of pride she had never known. For years, she had felt weak and powerless. Now she understood that her strength was not measured by size or weapons, but by courage and resilience. The next morning, Caleb took Alina to a nearby ridge overlooking Dustfall Station. The town looked small from this distance, quiet, almost fragile against the wide plains. "See that," he said. "That's where fear rules, but fear is a choice. People stay afraid because no one teaches them otherwise. Humans who remember, we change that." Alina watched the town, imagining how it might feel to be free from fear, to act with courage instead of silence. She knew Caleb was right. Humans could endure, adapt, and inspire. Over the next few days, they refined their strategy. Caleb set up signals, marking paths and creating decoys. Alina practiced moving quietly, observing the landscape and noticing small details that could save lives. Each day, she grew more confident. Each day, Caleb reminded her that being human meant more than surviving. It meant standing up for what was right, even when it was dangerous. One afternoon, a strange hum came from the horizon. Caleb's ears twitched, and his hand instinctively moved to the multi-tool at his belt. Alina followed his gaze and saw a small fleet of hovercraft approaching, the unmistakable shape of syndicate vehicles. "They've noticed us," Caleb said. "Time to see what humans can do when pushed." The vehicles slowed as they neared the ranch, clearly cautious. Caleb didn't panic. He had anticipated this. Using the terrain to his advantage, he guided Alina to a vantage point where they could observe the intruders without being seen. He explained the positions of the vehicles, the likely intentions of the occupants, and how to manipulate the environment to delay or mislead them. The syndicate scouts assumed that the ranch was unprepared. They expected an easy confrontation. Instead, Caleb used a series of clever maneuvers, false trails, dust clouds, and controlled obstacles that confused the hovercraft and slowed their approach. The scouts became disoriented, unsure which paths were real and which were traps. Alina watched in awe. This was not brute force. This was human ingenuity, patience, and resilience. The syndicate had underestimated what humans could do when they refused to be intimidated. Hours passed, and finally the scouts retreated, leaving the ranch in peace. Caleb allowed himself a small smile. Humans win sometimes by waiting, by outthinking, not outgunning. That's a lesson most forget. Alina nodded, her admiration growing. She realized that survival was not enough. Humans had to act, even when the odds seemed impossible. And one human standing firm could make a difference far beyond themselves. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb spoke softly. "Tomorrow, we'll plan to go back to Dustfall. Not to fight, not to attack, but to show them that humans are not helpless. One human standing can inspire many, and that's how change begins." Alina felt a new determination rising. The town had been silent for too long, afraid of the syndicate. But with Caleb's guidance, she knew she could stand, endure, and inspire others. Humans had survived the frontier for generations. Now they would remind Dustfall Station of that strength. As the stars shone above, the ranch stood quietly on the plains. Caleb and Alina, prepared, determined, and human, rested for the night. The future was uncertain, the challenges many, but they were ready. The syndicate would not forget this lesson. Humans endure, humans resist, and sometimes humans simply refuse to bow. The frontier was harsh. The odds were high. But Caleb Marr and Alina Voss had learned the greatest truth of all. Humans, when clever, patient, and courageous, could shape their own destiny. And the story of Dustfall Station was only just beginning. The morning sun rose slowly over Dustfall Station, casting long shadows across the empty streets. From the ridge above, Caleb Marr and Alina Voss observed the town, hidden by the sparse scrub and rocky outcrops. The settlement seemed unchanged at first glance, silent, dusty, and cautious. But Caleb knew better. Humans, even when afraid, notice things. They listened, they watched, and sometimes they learned. "See that?" Caleb said, pointing to a small cluster of figures near the marketplace. "People are watching. They don't move much, but they see. That's the first step. Fear makes them quiet, but curiosity can spark courage." Alina squinted through a small scope. "So they're noticing us," Caleb nodded. "They are, and we'll use that." For days, Caleb and Alina stayed hidden on the outskirts of the plains, observing and learning the patterns of the town. They noted when the enforcers patrolled, when the supply ships arrived, and how the townsfolk reacted to each disturbance. They did not interfere yet. Humans often learned by example, Caleb explained. Showing courage was sometimes more powerful than fighting. Alina listened carefully. She began to understand that human strength was not measured by weapons or numbers, but by persistence and intelligence. The syndicate controlled the town through fear, but fear could be challenged without a single blow. One afternoon, a minor accident occurred. A supply crate from a passing hovercraft toppled near the marketplace, spilling food and tools into the street. The townsfolk froze, unsure of what to do. The enforcers approached, ready to assert control, but Caleb had anticipated this. From his hidden vantage point, he signaled Alina to act. Alina stepped forward, cautiously at first, picking up a few scattered items and returning them to the merchants. Her movements were confident but careful, visible enough to be noticed by the people in the town, but distant enough to avoid confrontation with the enforcers. Caleb watched her, a small smile on his face. Humans notice what others do. They learn. They remember. That was your first lesson. Courage doesn't always need confrontation. Sometimes it's a quiet action that changes everything. The townsfolk began to murmur. Small gestures followed. A boy helped a merchant lift a crate. A woman steadied another crate for a child. Fear was still there, but so was a spark of confidence. Humans responded to example. Caleb knew the slow, steady rise of courage could be more effective than any fight. That night, as they returned to the ranch, Caleb spoke to Alina about the next step. "We need to make the town see that the syndicate's control is not absolute. We won't attack, we'll influence. We'll show them that humans can act even when they're afraid." Alina nodded, understanding the subtle power of their plan. "So we inspire them," Caleb smiled. "Exactly. Humans have survived countless dangers because we inspire each other. One act of courage can grow into many, and the town will see that." Over the next few days, Caleb and Alina implemented small strategies. They left subtle signs of resistance, trails that led away from the ranch, small disruptions of syndicate supply lines, clever rearrangement of equipment to confuse the enforcers. Nothing was violent. Everything was precise. Everything sent a message. Humans were not passive. The townsfolk began to notice. At first, it was whispers, people wondering why the enforcers were struggling to control small incidents. Then it was looks of curiosity and hope. Slowly, the town began to change, encouraged by the quiet demonstration of resilience from the outskirts. One morning, a syndicate patrol entered Dustfall Station, looking for the source of these disturbances. They expected to intimidate and control. Instead, they found the townsfolk more watchful, more cautious, and subtly defiant. Small gestures, unnoticed by the syndicate, showed that humans had begun to awaken. Caleb and Alina watched from a hidden ridge, their hearts steady. "They're noticing," Caleb said. "Not just the enforcers, but the people. Fear is losing its grip. Courage grows quietly like fire under the dust, and soon it will spread." Alina felt a growing sense of pride. She had once been powerless, silenced by fear and circumstance. Now she was part of something larger, a movement of awareness, courage, and human determination. She realized that humans did not need armies to fight injustice. Sometimes, standing firm and acting with intelligence was enough to inspire change. By midday, a small crowd had gathered near the marketplace, discussing minor incidents, noticing patterns, questioning authority. The syndicate patrols noticed this too, confusion spreading among their ranks. They had expected obedience. They had not expected the town to respond to subtle signals of courage. Caleb explained to Alina that the syndicate relied on predictability. Humans were anything but predictable. They think control is simple, he said. It's not. Humans are clever. Humans adapt. And once humans see that they are not alone, their strength grows. Alina nodded. So we show them what humans can do, without fighting. Exactly, Caleb said. Fighting is only one tool. Intelligence, patience, and courage are stronger. Over the next week, the town slowly began to act. A merchant refused to follow an enforcer's order, claiming he was busy. A child openly questioned why rules were enforced unfairly. Small acts, seemingly insignificant, spread confidence like ripples across water. Caleb observed quietly, guiding Alina, who now acted with confidence and purpose. One afternoon, a syndicate supervisor arrived in the town, sent to investigate the disturbances. He was imposing, confident, and used to unquestioned control. He expected resistance or submission. Instead, he found cautious defiance, organized small acts of independence, and the beginnings of human collaboration. Caleb and Alina watched from their ridge, noting the supervisor's frustration. "They're learning," Caleb said. "Humans can inspire each other." "Fear is losing its grip," Alina smiled. She realized that humans were not meant to live under fear indefinitely. They were meant to endure, adapt, and inspire each other, and that was exactly what was happening. The supervisor left, his report likely confused and alarming to his superiors. Dustfall Station had shifted, subtly but decisively. The enforcers had begun to notice the changes in behavior. They had not expected humans to act intelligently without direct orders. They had not expected humans to challenge fear with courage and thought. That night, Caleb and Alina returned to the ranch, tired but satisfied. The stars sparkled above them, calm and constant, a reminder that even in the harshest frontier, humans could endure and thrive. Caleb spoke quietly to Alina. "Tomorrow we'll push a little further, not with violence but with presence. Humans are stronger than most realize. One act of courage can ripple across a town, and that ripple will grow." Alina nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She had been afraid, silenced, and powerless. Now she was part of something larger, an awakening of human strength, intelligence, and courage. She knew that Caleb's lessons were more than survival. They were a blueprint for change, for resistance, and for hope. The wind carried the faint scent of Dustfall Station across the plains. Caleb adjusted his hat and surveyed the horizon. "Humans endure," he said softly. "Humans resist. Humans inspire. And once humans remember who they are, nothing can stop them." Alina watched the town, hidden in the distance, slowly moving toward courage. She realized that she had changed too. Fear no longer ruled her. Observation, preparation, and clever action had replaced it. She was ready for the next step, whatever it might be. The night stretched on, quiet but filled with possibility. The frontier was harsh, but humans were harsher in their resilience, sharper in their intelligence, and stronger in their courage. Caleb and Alina, prepared and determined, rested for the night, knowing that the town they had watched would never be the same again. And soon, very soon, Dustfall Station would have to face the truth. Humans, when clever, patient, and courageous, could reclaim their dignity, influence their world, and inspire a town to rise above fear. The frontier had a new rhythm, a subtle but powerful change that could not be ignored. And at the center of it all were two humans, small in number but vast in determination, ready to remind everyone what it meant to endure, resist, and inspire. The first light of morning stretched across Dustfall Station like a gentle promise. The town seemed calm, quiet, and ordinary at first glance. But from the ridge above, Caleb Marr and Alina Voss could see the subtle changes. The townsfolk were moving with purpose, quietly observing, whispering among themselves, and showing signs of courage that had been absent for years. Caleb adjusted his hat and studied the town. "They're ready," he said. "Not everyone, but enough. Fear is losing its grip. Courage is spreading." Elena watched the streets below, noting the small acts of resistance. A merchant refusing a petty order from an enforcer, a child openly questioning a command, a group of workers cooperating without waiting for instructions. It was subtle, but it was powerful. Humans were remembering who they were. "Are we doing this too soon?" Elena asked quietly. Caleb shook his head. "No, humans act when the moment is right, and this moment is ours. The syndicate expects compliance. They will be surprised." The plan was simple but effective. Caleb and Elena would not attack. They would not fight unnecessarily. Instead, they would guide the humans of Dustfall Station to act intelligently and decisively, using courage, observation, and persistence as their tools. By mid-morning, they had positioned themselves at vantage points overlooking the town. Elena carried supplies, messages, and markers that would help signal the townsfolk. Caleb used a small device to create harmless disturbances, tripping wires, setting off lights, or causing minor distractions. Each event drew the townsfolk's attention, prompting action and demonstrating control over the environment. The enforcers, confident in their authority, attempted to respond. They expected fear, confusion, and compliance. Instead, they faced organization, observation, and clever counteractions. Every minor move by Caleb and Elena disrupted the enforcer's plan, revealing weaknesses and teaching the townsfolk that fear was not absolute. Elena smiled as she watched a small group of humans subtly redirect the enforcer's attention, preventing them from enforcing unfair rules. "They're learning," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "Humans always learn when someone shows them the way. One act of courage can inspire many." Today, we are the example. As the day progressed, the disturbances increased. A wagon tipped over near the marketplace, spilling goods, but this time the townsfolk acted without hesitation. They worked together to right the wagon, organize the supplies, and communicate efficiently. The enforcers were left frustrated, unable to control the situation, while Caleb and Elena observed from above. The human spirit, long suppressed by fear, began to shine. Small acts of courage multiplied, spreading like ripples across a pond. Merchants helped each other. Workers cooperated without waiting for orders. Children watched openly, learning that courage could replace silence. By late afternoon, a syndicate supervisor arrived in the town, accompanied by enforcers. He had been sent to restore order and investigate the disturbances. He expected obedience, submission, and fear. Instead, he faced organized resistance, intelligence, and collaboration. Humans who had been silent for years now acted decisively, challenging the assumptions of authority. Caleb and Elena moved closer, still hidden but ready to guide the unfolding events. They whispered instructions to the townsfolk, coordinated small interventions, and ensured that each action strengthened the message. Humans were not to be controlled by fear alone. The supervisor tried to assert authority, issuing commands and threats. But the townsfolk, inspired by Caleb and Elena's presence, ignored intimidation. They acted, reasoned, and collaborated. The enforcers faltered, frustrated by the unexpected defiance. Their confidence was shaken. Elena felt a surge of pride. She had once been powerless, silenced by fear and circumstance. Now she was part of a movement that reminded humans of their true strength. Observation, preparation, and intelligent action had replaced fear. Humans were standing, enduring, and inspiring each other. Caleb surveyed the scene. "Humans don't need armies to win," he said softly. "We need courage, intelligence, and persistence, and now they see it for themselves." As evening approached, the supervisor finally withdrew, reporting confusion and resistance to his superiors. Dustfall Station had changed subtly but decisively. The townsfolk had learned that fear could be challenged, that courage could spread, and that even in the harshest frontier, humans could take control of their destiny. Caleb and Alina moved into the town quietly, now visible but still unthreatening. They helped repair small damages, guided operations to organize the streets, and spoke with merchants and workers, offering encouragement. Each interaction reinforced the lesson. Humans could survive, adapt, and inspire each other without violence. By nightfall, Dustfall Station had a new rhythm. Fear had not vanished entirely, but courage had taken root. The townsfolk worked together, communicated openly, and acted decisively when faced with challenges. The syndicate's control had weakened, not through conflict, but through the quiet and powerful assertion of human ingenuity and resilience. Alina stood beside Caleb on the ridge once more, overlooking the town now bathed in soft lantern light. "They did it," she said quietly. "They stood up," Caleb nodded. "Humans always do, eventually. Sometimes it takes one person to remind them who they are. And sometimes that person isn't enough until they act with another, and then another until the movement grows. Today, the town remembered." Alina looked at him, gratitude and admiration shining in her eyes. "You taught me more than survival. You taught me how to lead, how to inspire, how to act even when the odds are high." Caleb smiled faintly. "Humans are capable of extraordinary things when they refuse to be passive. You just needed to remember that. So did the town." The wind carried faint whispers across the plains. Caleb adjusted his hat and surveyed the horizon. The frontier was harsh, and the syndicate would likely try again, but the people of Dustfall Station had learned something new. Fear was not absolute. Courage, intelligence, and persistence could shape destiny. Humans endured. Humans resisted. Humans inspired. Alina turned back toward the town, feeling a sense of belonging and strength she had never known. She realized that the human spirit was not just about survival, it was about action, influence, and dignity. And in that moment, she felt connected to every person in the town who had dared to act, however small the step, against injustice. Caleb rested a hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow, life continues. But tonight, humans remembered themselves. And once that memory takes hold, no force can erase it." The stars appeared above the plains, constant and endless, reflecting the enduring human spirit. Dustfall Station lay below, transformed not by violence, but by courage, intelligence, and the quiet persistence of two humans who refused to bend under fear. Alina felt a smile spread across her face. The frontier was harsh, the odds high, but humans, clever, patient, and brave, would always endure. Caleb Marr and Alina Voss had shown them that, and as long as humans remembered who they were, the frontier would never forget. Caleb glanced at Alina. "We've done what we came to do. The town is ready to defend itself, to act, to endure. And now," Alina waited. "Now," Caleb said, mounting his horse, "we return to the frontier. Humans always move forward. We protect, inspire, and endure. That's what we do." Alina followed, riding beside him, feeling the weight of the day and the promise of the future. Dustfall Station lay behind them, a place forever changed by human courage and intelligence. And the frontier stretched ahead, vast, challenging, and full of possibilities for those willing to stand, act, and endure. The wind blew gently across the plains, carrying dust and whispers of human strength. Caleb and Alina rode toward the horizon, two humans among many, yet powerful enough to remind a town, and perhaps the frontier itself, that humans, when clever, patient, and brave, could shape their own destiny. And for the first time in a long time, Dustfall Station knew it too.